time. So we'll call the committee to order. Just a couple of things of business. This committee will be recessed at the end of our business this morning because there will be a joint hearing with finance on a bill, Senate Bill 297, which has to do with the risk pools and how the municipalities can do that. And it was assigned to finance, but because it deals with municipal things, I wanted that hearing to be a joint hearing so that the members of our committee will be there, be able to ask questions and participate in the hearing. But finance will be the ones who, when it is eventually voted out, will be the ones that do the voting. So we'll go from there then. Affects both of you and Mr. Rochford. So if you can be there, please. If not, we'll have it streamed so you can, go back and review it. All right. And with that, the first bill that we have is Senate Bill 214. We have the prime sponsor, and if you'd introduce yourself and the bill.
Thank you, Chairman. For the record, I'm Senator Rebecca Perkins Quokka, representing District 21, comprised of the city of Portsmouth and surrounding towns, and I'm here to introduce SB 214, enabling no excuse absentee registration and voting. This is an effort we continue to make towards ensuring that everyone in the state can vote in a way that's convenient for them and accommodates whatever they may have going on in their lives. We have traditionally had a variety of categories for people to use when registering for an absentee ballot. Some of those categories have been known to cause some confusion, to be interpreted ambiguously, to be overly restrictive. And so this bill, as drafted, just essentially removes the restrictions on why someone can receive an absentee ballot and allows it to be requested for any reason that will cause the person to be absent from the polls on election day. So we all know that the right to vote is fundamental and sacred here. We've seen absentee ballots used at a high volume during the pandemic with no issues or problems. And so we just want to continue to work to make it easier for people to vote. And that is the idea behind this legislation. So with that, I will take any questions.
Questions from the committee? I have one. There is no constitutional amendment in here, which is one of the objections that has been on this one, is that the words in the Constitution may not allow it once it goes to a court. Comment?
Yes, thank you, sir. I know that issue's been raised before in connection with the phrase physical disability. So I think that that's always something that we as the legislature can exercise our will on and see what the court's modern interpretation is. But the intent is certainly to continue to make it easier for everybody to vote, something that I think we agree on. The devil is in the details.
All righty. Any additional questions?
Yeah, I just
Sir?
want to follow up. So again, I think in our Constitution, we enumerate the cause for absentee ballots and what's allowed. Given that it does enumerate and it doesn't just say absentee ballots allowed, how do we get around the fact that the Constitution has a specific provision of what's allowed for the purposes for an absentee ballot, and then to just throw it open to no provision other than if you want to do it, you can do it? How do we get around that?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. I mean, certainly I appreciate the approach to making sure that we're following our Constitution. I also think constitutions were written, historically. We can always look at modern interpretations, and I also would be very open to bringing a constitutional amendment if we thought we had the votes to do that.
Additional questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you,
I
Senator.
don't see any state reps on here. So, Andrew, you're first up.
Am I facing the mic?
You're all set.
Can you hear me? Okay. My name is Andrew Harmon. I am a resident of the town of New Hampton. Nice to meet you, Mr. Lang. I am here to speak in support of SB 214. While I appreciate that there is a carve out for people with disabilities, what is a disability isn't always immediately obvious, and what would qualify for that. I know someone who has had multiple medical issues which would prevent them from being able to easily get to a voting place, especially since she's also works 2 jobs back to back. So having something like this that would allow for her to be able to go and get an absentee ballot would be really, really helpful. Thank you very much. I know there are other things I could speak to, but I know there are other people who are going to speak, and I'm willing to take questions.
Questions for Andrew? Seeing none, thank you very much. Liz?
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Liz Tentarelli of Manchester with the League of Women Voters of New Hampshire. I'm urging you to support this bill and to treat voters of all parties and of all persuasions as grown-ups. We should be able to decide when it makes more sense in our lives, whether for reasons of health or jobs or commitments at home, to vote absentee without having to go through a long list of, do I fit that category? Do I not fit that category? We are also already taking the term disability broadly, according to instructions from the Secretary of State, that it applies to someone with medical conditions who have been advised not to go into public crowds because of their vulnerable health systems and so on. They don't know how to find those reasons. If they just knew that it makes more sense for me to vote absentee than to go and stand in a crowded room, they should be able to do that. There is no party advantage in this bill. Republicans and Democrats equally have family situations and personal situations that encourage them to vote absentee. And we did it successfully, as Senator Perkins Quokka pointed out, during the 2020 pandemic. About 1/3 of the voters voted absentee, and it worked. And I hope that we can move forward and let it work with this bill. I will take questions if there are any.
Questions? Oop, I thought I saw your hand go up.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Sarah?
Good morning, Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Sarah Chenard, and I'm the Voting Rights Program Manager for the New Hampshire Campaign for Voting Rights, which is a project of America Votes. And we are here in support of SB 214. As a coalition, the New Hampshire Campaign for Voting Rights is committed to supporting legislation that expands and supports voter access, which is exactly what this bill does. And by allowing any voter who wishes to safely and easily cast their vote by absentee ballot, more voters will be able to participate in the process. As Liz mentioned as well, this is a nonpartisan practice. Voting absentee doesn't have an advantage to either party. And it's also important to remember that with absentee voting in New Hampshire, our local election officials are still the ones to send out and process the ballots, verify identity, domicile, age, and citizenship. So there are important levels of security and local control in the process. So thank you again for your time, and I will take questions if there are any.
Questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we have another David Tremble.
Okay, he was going to be over in education. They had a couple bills over there,
Okay.
so.
Olivia?
Good morning, Chairman and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Olivia Zink, a voter in Franklin and Executive Director of Open Democracy. We're a nonpartisan nonprofit representing 36,000 voters across New Hampshire, and I submit testimony strongly support of Senate Bill 214. New Hampshire is one of 14 states that still require an excuse to get an absentee ballot. This is not a matter of convenience. This is about meeting the needs of Granite State voters. Wanted to just say that no excuse absentee voting is a history of bipartisan support with Republican-led states like Arizona, Montana, Indiana, Kansas, and Nebraska dropping requirements for absentee ballots in the 90s. And a 2018 poll suggests 57% of Republicans across this country support no excuse absentee voting. I think that this is important for citizens, no matter what their party is, whether they don't have time to stand in long lines, or whether they have a sick child, or a broken down vehicle, or a medical emergency, to be able to cast a ballot using an absentee ballot. We also, democracy thrives when people participate. So removing barriers to participate encourages a healthy democracy. No excuse benefits everyone, no matter the party, or whether you have trouble getting to the polls, whether you live in the North Country, or whether you're a first responder or a single parent. I want to tell a story of a Republican voter in my town who is a veteran and has trouble walking, is not disabled, but just has trouble walking, enjoys going to the polls, but sometimes it would be easier on days that it's hard to move around to cast an absentee ballot. Please think of all voters and please support ought to pass. Of 214, sorry. Wrong number, 214. Wanted to bring up the question that was asked earlier. Our Constitution has two reasons for absentee ballots in our Constitution. Religious observation is not one of those excuses, but that's an excuse that is allowable. Weather is not people can get an absentee ballot if there's a weather emergency, but that's not in our Constitution. You already have more excuses than what the Constitution allows. And I think, one reasonable interpretation is that the lawmakers can expand rights in our Constitution. And so please support this.
Additional questions? Seeing none, thank you much. All right. Is there anyone who didn't sign up that needs to speak? We'll have him check the list. For the people that signed up online, there was 355 in support, 20 opposed. There was 2 additional people, one who was going to speak and one who didn't want to speak, that did sign up in support. Oh. And that was a not speak too, so. All right, with that, we'll close the public hearing. I have a motion to go into executive session.
So moved.
I have a motion and a second to go into executive session. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed say nay. And the bill that we have in front of us, 214, I will move ITL.
I will second that.
Yes, ma'am.
Ready when you are.
Okay, I'd like to speak to my motion now. It was myself and Senator Lang. Certainly, we heard from Mr. Olivia Zink about others, that supposedly don't meet the criteria of the Constitution. Well, the spirit of the Constitution was that people who cannot get to the polls ought to be able to have the right to vote. And through the years, Ms. Tentarelli and I have added various things to this particular law, and I can't think of any of the ones that that you guys cited that we can't get under the law the way it is right now. And so opening this up with the constitutional questions without an excuse is a bridge too far for me. So that's my comments. Other comments?
Thank you, Chair.
Senator Perkins spoke.
Yes, thank you. And I do want to acknowledge that I do think there's been work to make sure that any new situation we've raised specifically has, to some degree been accommodated under existing law. So I think there have been places we've been able to work together on this, but I also think there's a lot of administration, and the average voter just wants to make sure they're complying with the law, especially in today's environment. There's an awful lot of conversation about whether people are doing the right or wrong thing when they go exercise their civic duty to vote. And I don't think that serves us well. I think it would be a better environment for everybody if we had simple, straightforward rules that allowed us to exercise our right to vote in a way that was convenient, knowing, especially in today's unaffordable environment, people are, trying to get up, get their kids to school, put breakfast on the table. They're stressed about their jobs. They got to get kids home for dinner, just making it to the polls for a person that does not necessarily meet any of these categories, can just be a regular everyday challenge. So I think this continues to be something that I'd like to see just simplified and expanded over time.
And this conversation can continue. We still have Senate Bill 213, which deals with a lot of these same issues. So, Senator Lang.
So thank you. So as someone, I still work for a living, so sometimes getting to the polls could be a possible problem. But I know that we open the polls up on Mondays now. We actually mandate that polls be open on Monday before the election, so that anybody who, like me, could all of a sudden find out Tuesday I was planning on being in the town, but now all of a sudden I find out the day before I'm not going to be able to be in the town. I can just walk into town hall and I can grab an absentee ballot. I can fill out the absentee ballot. I can give the absentee ballot to my clerk, and it'll be counted the very next day.
I saw eyebrows go up when you say the polls be open.
Not the polls,
It's,
town
town
clerks, apologies.
clerk, town
Town
hall,
clerks,
yeah.
Town hall is open to allow
Yeah.
for the acceptance of absentee ballots, so we require that. And so, again, I think we've made immense strides in allowing people to be able to vote easily, be able to get in. If an emergency pops up the day before, we've allowed for them to be able to, even at the last minute, to go get an absentee ballot, not worry about for a mail process to happen. They can just walk in the town hall the day before the election and get an absentee ballot. So I do think the Constitution's pretty, I think we've stretched it pretty thin with all the exceptions we've created already, and I'm not willing to create another. And in this case, make it so it's just, there are no requirements at all, and just ignore the Constitution as it's been written. So I'm going to be voting in favor of the ITL motion.
Any additional comments? All those in favor of ITL say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay.
Nay.
The ayes have it, and I will take it out. And I'm assuming that you don't want it on consent, Senator. And with that, I take a motion to come out of executive
So
session.
moved.
Second.
We have a motion second to come out of executive session. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. The ayes have it, and we will have the hearing. I thought I saw the prime sponsor.
He's in the hallway.
Okay. And we will start the hearing as soon as we get in here. You can come get these sheets. Another just informational item, we do have two FNs that we will act on today. They do have amendments.
Disappeared.
All right. And Senator Lang, if you would introduce the next bill.
Thank you. On behalf of Senator McGonkey, I introduce Senate Bill 215 requiring unorganized towns or unincorporated places to elect town officers for the purpose of conducting elections.
Okay. Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm David Scanlon, Secretary of State, and I am here in support of Senate Bill 215. Unincorporated places are unique in our election process. For the most part, unincorporated places are in the North Country, I believe, Coas, Grafton, and Carroll County. And there are a number of those unincorporated places that have populations large enough where they have organized for the purposes of elections. They don't really have a town government because they are not incorporated that way. The county is in which they belong is responsible for the costs that are involved with the governance of the unincorporated place. But there is a provision in the statute that says that an unincorporated place can organize for the purpose of elections only, in which case they elect a moderator, a clerk, selectmen, and supervisors of the checklist so that they can fulfill the responsibilities related to an election. There are 3 unincorporated places presently that have organized, Hart's Location, Millsfield, and Dixville Notch. When we go through the redistricting process, every 10 years, unincorporated places are assigned to an adjacent community that is incorporated that belongs in the same state representative district as the others. And when we go through the redistricting process, and depending on how the legislature forms the districts, we have to realign which unincorporated places are allocated to the various towns. And sometimes it is amazing. Some of the most remote places, there'll be a couple of voters that literally walk out of the woods and register to vote. And there is opportunity for them to do that. There is one unincorporated place, Hales Location, that has not organized for the purposes of elections, and they have a sizable population that is larger than some of the smallest towns in New Hampshire. In the past, they have aligned with the town of Conway, and Conway has handled the election for those voters that show up at the polling place to vote. But after the last redistricting, Conway was placed in a different state representative district. So Hales Location had to be assigned to an adjacent town. There weren't too many options, and it ended up being Bartlett, which is not too far away. The Bartlett selectmen have had issues with that because of the strains that it places on their polling place and responsibilities for the election. So I felt after a conversation with Senator McConkey that a good approach to this is that if a unincorporated place reaches a population of over a certain threshold, that they must organize for the purpose of elections. And so essentially that is what this bill does. I would ask for your support, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Questions?
So does that mean the town that aligned, you just have to keep a second polling book for the voters from that other town? So
Yes.
it'd be 2 separate different polling books that this town now has to manage?
Yes, they're basically running 2 elections in that one polling place.
Thank you.
Senator Pearlman.
Thank you, Chair. The concept, of course, makes sense. I guess, how is this election of officers conducted? Is that addressed in this?
Thanks, that's a good question. There is a process in the statute that that lays that out. And basically what it is notifying all of the residents in the unincorporated place that there is going to be a meeting that will take place for the purpose of organizing the election, and officers can be elected at that meeting.
Follow up?
Yes, ma'am.
What happens if there are no volunteers to be these officers? How does the election get conducted?
That's a good hypothetical question.
I-
I mean,
Unlikely, but yeah.
there are towns that face those problems
Today.
in reality. If after the organizational meeting and and electing of officers takes place, there's still vacancies, then there are appointing authorities in place that could reach out and find people to do the job.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Additional questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The online signups were 3 support, 1 oppose, and the prime sponsor did leave me a note that said that he had to be in 2 places at once. With that, I'll close the public hearing and accept a motion to go into executive session.
So moved.
Second.
Have a motion and a second to go into executive session. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. We're in executive session.
I move OTP on Senate Bill 215.
And we have a motion of ought to pass on 215. We have a second. Comments, questions from senators?
Yes.
only one
Senator
applies
from the
to.
North Country.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I have the unique distinction of having the most unincorporated places and unorganized towns in my district. I don't feel, and I have not received any feedback from my constituents that would indicate that this would put any undue burden on the town. So I support the OTP motion.
All right. Senator Perkins Coker, you had a comment also?
Not particularly. I think it's important to make sure those questions I asked are addressed, but it sounds like they are. So,
Certainly, in a city, ward, or a town, either through the moderator or the selectman, there would be a way to appoint. If nothing else, I believe that the state law would default back to the Superior Court, who could take action there. So that particular issue, as long as it's thought of ahead of time, I think is well within existing policy to take care of. But again, that's just my opinion, and I'm sure that the Secretary of State will do his due diligence to tell us if we've done something wrong before I vote on this a week from Thursday or more.
yes, and I'm looking through our RSAs now, so I'm comfortable with that.
Okay, so with no other questions, the motion is ought to pass. All those in favor of ought to pass say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. The ayes have it.
Move consent.
We have a motion for consent.
Second.
Have a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Senator Rochford, you have the most. You get this one. Okay.
Move motion to come out.
Well,
of
not,
Not yet?
if,
Come out of
I
exec.
mean, I've got 3 minutes,
Yeah, you got a bill number. Let's go.
I can do a lot in 3 minutes. Senate Bill 44, you guys all have an amendment in front of you. I think it's 44. Yeah. All right, so I'm looking at it right now, and the original bill, in section 1, apparently when I gave it to him, I didn't do the hand changes, because 44 as it stands right now in line, this is the regular bill, because I was going to have any city, ward, or town that currently electronic voting, and that I was going to do 2% or 10. Is there anyone else that has the problem with that paragraph 1 that I have? That the numbers may not be
If I may,
So
Mr.
right
Chair.
now- Yes,
If I remember right in our discussion, I thought your amendment was going to be a replace all amendment
Me too.
and get rid of the whole 2% and everything else, which we could still do by adopting the amendment and just changing it to a replace section 1. And that would just take care of it and make it a replace all amendment. But that was my understanding, was we were going to do just a replace all amendment.
all right, so if we take amendment 0663S, instead of having it be adding a new section to make it a replace all, and having that as a committee amendment. All right, so for the bill, we need a motion ought to pass.
Mr. Chair, I'll move OTP.
Okay, and I will second it. And then we'll need a motion on the amendment.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to move amendment 663S, understanding I'm going to make another committee motion to amend that amendment.
Yep. I'll second. And your amendment to the amendment is?
By changing line 1, say amend the bill by replacing section 1 with the following, and change that on line 4, change number 2 to number 1. I believe that should take care of it.
I agree.
Okay, no. Sometimes when we get into these, OLS, wants to change things as long as it's materially the same, it'll go through the way it is. There is one that we've got on the calendar for this Thursday where they changed the thing around a little bit more than I was comfortable with. So it will be brought to the floor and we will vote on the amendment that way. So does everyone understand what the committee amendment is?
I do, but I actually do have a comment. I think
Yep.
we need it to, I think we need the committee amendment to be amend the bill by replacing section 1 with the following.
Yep.
Because there's no renumbering if we replace section 1.
And then strike and
Yes.
renumber and strike to the end of the sentence.
Yeah.
That's why I have it written out. I was going to give the,
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. Jessica, you've got that?
I'll give it.
Okay, so with that as an understanding, we are voting on the committee amendment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. Now we're voting on the bill as amended. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. Do we have a motion
Move
for
consent.
consent?
Second.
I have a motion for consent. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. And I don't know who the original sponsor was.
I believe Senator Avar.
I'll pick it up.
Okay, Senator Lang. All right. Look at that, look at that, see? And we're only a couple minutes back.
I'll move to come out of exec.
We have a motion to come out of executive session, all those in favor. Excuse me, we need a second. Not that we need a second, but they'd like me to have a second.
If you try to take away the seconds, I'm gonna get all messed up.
All those in favor of coming out of executive session, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. We are out of executive session, and we're ready to hear 216. Is that the next one?
216, I believe.
Okay. And we have the prime sponsor.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
If you'd introduce yourself and the bill, please.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I'm Senator Tim McHugh, District 11, Merrimack, Amherst, Milford, and Wilton, here to introduce Senate Bill 216 and ask you to support it on to pass. So I'll give you a little bit of background. This bill aims to address two fairly, hopefully simple things. To further define in the electioneering statutes the phrase prior to, when it refers to the moderator's jurisdiction over the electioneering zone,
Yeah.
and attended, as it refers to attending protected political communication or signs. So that's the gist of what this bill intends to do. There are two things that needed to be corrected in the original draft, and that's done in the amendment. So I'll cover those right up front. If you're looking at the original bill, in line 10, at the end of line 10, the word ending should fairly obviously be open. Be in terms of where it says when the polls are ending, it should say polls are open. So that has been corrected in the amendment that is hopefully been circulated or is being circulated now. Thank you. So the amendment is an all after the enacting clause amendment. The other error, or the other oversight, I should say, is in section 6. We inadvertently created a conflict with 664.17 and needed to insert a notwithstanding clause so we don't inadvertently create that conflict, because there is a prohibition on placement of political signage in public property, and many electioneering zones are in fact public property. So if we define prior to and put a specific parameter such as 24 hours for placement of political signage, that could potentially conflict with 664.17, and the AG's office correctly pointed that out. So we inserted the notwithstanding clause. So those are the two technical corrections that the amendment does. So other than that, it's an all after the enacting clause, and the legislation is designed specifically to clarify a little bit of vagueness that it exists in the current statute, and that is silent in the rather voluminous election policy manual. So I know there's at least one town moderator in the room, probably several. And many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the comprehensive election procedure manual. But there's a couple things that are left unspoken, and often for good reason, because there's different strokes for different folks. Every town's a little bit different. Some polling places are at churches, some are at schools, some have a lot of parking, some have a little bit of parking. So moderators do generally a great job exercising discretion and adapting to the circumstances, weather, placement, turnout, things like that. But what I found is when I went to and many of you have been to or experienced many more elections than I have, but over 10 or 12 elections over 30 years and 6 or 10 different polling places, they're all just a little bit different, and they seem to flex. But I believe that if we define the rules up front, let everybody know what they are, and that will help equal enforcement. So if we know, for instance, that candidates can place their signs at a certain time, either midnight the night before, or after school closes the day before, or just before the polls open, whatever that may be, it will help the candidates perform to those guidelines, and it will help those tasked with that enforcement. What I have found and what others have found, and actually there's another bill in the other body that asks for schematic diagrams, which, as it turns out, is something that I experienced, and it was very, very successful in my district in helping candidates decide where they're going to put their tents and tables and chairs and that sort of thing. We found that the more the communication is given to the candidates, the better the polling day goes and the less conflict there is between candidates. So what I'm asking is that we address those particular issues, as many other states have. Arizona, Texas, a lot of other states have done similar things. And when we have a structured environment like this, it's generally a little more intimidation free. I'll give you one other example. In some cases, there's a polling place with limited parking, so parking is utilized perhaps on an adjacent property. So the question comes, does the moderator have jurisdiction over parking that's not part of that particular property? Say you have the polling place at a school, and then across the street, there's a church that has, just by gentleman's agreement, maybe it's an official agreement, maybe not, where all of the voters typically park. If there's signage or electioneering happening, does that corridor extend into that parking lot, even if it's mere feet away? That's private property. Maybe it's church property. In one case, it is church property in my district. Should the moderator have jurisdiction over that? Does that corridor extend, ad infinitum? Probably not, I contend. So that's what this bill attempts to define. And the other piece is, what exactly is prior to? Is it, 5 minutes before the polls open, 5 hours the day before? And I have seen all of the above. I've literally seen not until 6 o'clock in the morning. Can you set up your signs in this chalk marked area? And again, I don't have a strong opinion as to what those guidelines are, just that we set them, communicate them, and equally enforce them. And so I've attempted to take a stab at setting some of those guidelines, and I'm happy to
Questions from the
take
senators?
questions.
Senator Lang.
I was a moderator for 15 years. I've dealt with a lot of these issues, but my question is this, my one concern is the moderator in section 3, the moderator shall have control over electioneering area only during the hours during the hours the polls are open, and yet I staged the day before. I create a staging area, I establish the staging area, here's the electioneering corridor, I put barricades up, I do those kind of things that are necessary so when they do show up at 6 o'clock in the morning and I'm inside setting the polling place up, which still is not, the polls aren't open. So there's still an hour or so where I may have people and candidates show up, and you're saying they can hold signs when people are not even, the polling place isn't open yet. And they can put signs up all over the place and not even be there until the polls open?
Senator, that is an excellent question, which is exactly why we've defined it as the electioneering area, which, as you know, is that specific area and the corridor. So you're obviously a very thorough, detailed moderator and clearly communicate, and your practices are well known. I wish that were the case at every single polling place, but we narrow it to the moderator in line 9, moderator shall have control over the no electioneering corridor during the hours that the polling place is open. Right. So it's only have control over the no electioneering corridor only during when the polling place is open. So does that make sense? So it's limited to control over the non-election or the no electioneering corridor during the polling place. So you would we'd like to limit the moderator control over, let's say, the adjacent private property. So if someone wanted to park their vehicle, for instance, in let's say, the neighboring property, the moderator couldn't prohibit that. Because why should they? It's not the polling place. It's not the electioneering corridor. It's not during polling hours. Why should a moderator be able to prohibit where a public person should be able to park on a not an electioneering corridor, not during polling hours? It's none of their business where that private person parks. Now, if the owner of that property wants to make that prohibition, that's another story.
That's fine. I was talking to section 3, which is the electioneering corridor, where you're allowed to electioneer and candidates are allowed to be and hold signs and do work. And yet I don't have any control of that until 7:01 when I've opened the polls.
So
I would have no,
So do you have control over it now?
well, so I stage it now, and at 6 o'clock in the morning, I
today.
make sure there's no.
Today.
We're getting into a back and forth. And
But this is my point.
I can't do that.
This is my point, though. What is prior to? And for every moderator, like a reasonable time, like 24 hours is a reasonable time, in my opinion. And in this moderator's opinion, the senator's opinion, like that's an excellent practice, in my opinion, because I'm sure your candidates know that. But here's where the problem becomes. It's the moving target. And that's what many candidates have experienced. And there were other bill filers on the same topic, and there were in the other body too, and you'll see them. It's when it's communicated that it's going to be, and I experienced this in my most recent election, During the primary, it was okay to set up at one polling place, a major polling place, 5 p.m. the day before. And then at the general, that was communicated as the acceptable practice the day before. That was changed to midnight. At 10 p.m. that night, it was changed to 5 a.m. 3 times in a 24-hour period, the setup time was changed. So that's what we're trying to adjust. What exactly is prior to? So the senator has indicated that what his practice is, but the problem is it varies. And again, no opinion as to what the right answer is, just that there be an answer and that the answer be communicated fairly and enforced equally. That's the problem that we experience. And especially with many of you have much larger districts than I do and that other candidates do, but there's many, many multi-town districts, multi-polling place districts, and it's difficult to staff and difficult to play along by the rules. We just need to set them, communicate them, and enforce them fairly.
Senator Perkins Poker, you had a question?
Yeah, I think my colleague is raising most of them, but it does seem like some logistical issues were raised. Another one was, it looks like our moderator in Merrimack was raising that, not having control prior to the polls opening is difficult. And it also, they're raising the fact that different polling stations may have a different setup for how you want to set up your electioneering corridor. You don't want to make the entire parking lot available for electioneering. I mean, I think it seems like there are just some practical concerns with the language that we want to make sure moderators are able to just administer the election in a way that works. And I guess, what is the issue you were trying to solve with this legislation?
Prior to, what is prior to? Is it today? This is prior to the election. Does the moderator have jurisdiction over the electioneering corridor or the non-electioneering corridor now?
So, follow up if I may, sir?
Yep.
Perhaps, I don't know if I would support this, but perhaps your intent might be addressed by saying the moderator has authority on the day of the election.
Indeed it would.
Okay.
I think we all know when the day starts.
Okay.
And then the second piece is attended. So I think we've probably all in this room have heard the discussion, what exactly is an attended sign? And I think we've probably heard the discussion that you would probably agree that I'm currently attending to my iPad, which is here. I'm currently touching it. Right now, I'm probably still attending my iPad. If my iPad were sitting in front of the chairman, you could argue that I'm not attending it, although I am in the same room. If it were down the hall or across the street, am I still attending my iPad? Therein lies the discussion. Right. And that has been the discussion from polling place to polling place. And I'm sure you've all heard it because it's an active discussion. So that's the problem, is defining attending. Are you near it, arm's length, actually touching it? What is it? And again, I think reasonable for me, I could tell you what reasonable for me is, but again, I don't have a strong opinion what the resolution to that definition is, just that we have one and that everybody knows it and that it's equally communicated and enforced. Because then we can all well play by it.
Personally, I think there's several things in here that would need to be discussed in executive session. So unless the senators have additional questions, we will move on. Okay? Thank you. Pete from Milford.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Pete Spasilier. I am Milford's town moderator, and I've been the moderator almost as long as Senator Lang since 2008. And during that time, I've overseen 39 elections, including 5 presidential elections. And I'm speaking in opposition to Senate Bill 216. It proposes several changes in different sections. I'd just like to touch on those briefly for you. First, the no electioneering corridor extension may not extend beyond the property. At Milford, we have sufficient space to hold the no electioneering and electioneering corridors on the property itself. But I'm aware of other small communities that don't have that luxury. And so while it doesn't affect me and the operation of the Milford poll specifically, I can see where it would impact other communities. Section 3 refers to the moderator shall only have control over the electioneering areas during the hours the polling place is open. In Milford, the polling place is open from 6 to 8. In November, we still had some new voters in line, so we actually extended the hours for the people who are already in the building. But if we were to make it as much as 24 hours in advance, then that electioneering would be taking place on the high school property, unless this notwithstanding amendment passes, and available for in front of all the students and the passersby for a full day in advance. In my personal opinion, if we were to try to legislate the hours that the no electioneering zone and the electioneering zones are applied, it would be 1 hour before and no more than 1 hour after the polls are open. Let's make it all very clear that it's on the day, and it's on a day within which the moderator and the assistant moderators can manage that space. In regarding to Section 4, about unattended signs being placed no more than 24 hours in advance, that is my point. We're talking about a wide range of public and private facilities, and state law should not dictate how those facilities operate on the day before the election. And then regarding the term reasonable proximity, which is in the bill's language, I think it replaces vague language with equally vague language. And I would rather see that if this bill was to proceed, that you incorporate language derived from the the election procedure manual that was alluded to earlier that the Secretary of State produces. And in my preference, I would recommend something along the lines of unattended signs are those that are not directly controlled by the person electioneering. That would get to the example of a sign that's right within arm's reach, but it would exclude ones that are across the room or laid against the wall of a building. And what it basically means is that the candidate and the candidate's supporters just need to be there to accompany the signage that is being used to promote their cause. I want to thank you very much for your time, and I am open to taking any questions you may
for
have.
Seeing none, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Dave Nelson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Dave Nelson, Derry Town Moderator. I'm speaking in opposition to this bill, certainly as written. I share many of the concerns of my colleague from Milford. I will go through some of the specifics. In line 8, it talks about beyond the property, which assumes that it is a single parcel of land, which is mostly the case, but in Derry, we utilize the Pinkerton Academy campus. And most of the parking is across a public road, which would make it a different parcel. It happens to be under common ownership, but I don't want to have poll lawyer arguments with anyone about the difference between parcels and the properties which are used for the election. So I would suggest that at the very least that property be made properties. With respect to the time during which the moderator can control the non-electioneering area, the purpose of that, as outlined in lines 3 through 6, is that it provides a corridor for voters to approach the polls without any interference, intimidation, or even forced interaction with candidates. I've observed that there are kind of two classes of voters: those that really like to shake hands and chat and interact with the candidates, and the others who find it extremely intimidating, and it's often referred to as running the gauntlet. So I believe that the intent of those sections of the law are to allow both kinds of voters to have their choice, to allow interaction by voluntary choice and to allow isolation if chosen. Especially for the larger elections, we have people lining up well before the polls open. And I guess my concern is that if we do not allow enforcement of the no electioneering zone until the polls are open, all the people who are in line cannot take advantage of the no electioneering quarter, as I believe the intent of the law provides. With respect to placement of signs and enforcement of the electioneering zone, again, this is a private school campus. We have a very good relationship with them. They're very cooperative. But we don't set up anything until after school is completed on the day before the election. So the non-electioneering quarter is not demarked. The electioneering preferred place is not demarked until late that night. And so if we were allowed to allow signage to be placed, for example, as recommended in this draft of the bill, 24 hours in advance, we're asking Pinkerton to allow signage on their private property against their specific policies. Now, state law can override that, but we want to maintain good relationships with Pinkerton. We want to be able to honor their policies, except during election day when the property that's used for polling is under the jurisdiction of the town and or state. So I think that as written, this solves a problem in a too constrictive way. The problems that the non-electioneering zones and the electioneering statute in general is intended to address start well before the polls open, for example, at 7 a.m. And so I would prefer that you disapprove the bill, make it ITL. If the committee thinks it's worth approving, I would recommend significant amendments and maybe defining election day as starting, 12:01 on that Tuesday, so that we don't have folks trying to abuse the hospitality of our host polling place. And I'd be happy to take questions.
Questions from senators?
I-
Senator Lang?
So I hadn't thought about this, but I was reading that section 1, Roman numeral 2, where you talk about properties. So I'm thinking of my hometown where I do where we hold poll elections. Our election is in town hall. We have a church and we have a library, 3 different properties, but the election actually occurs. The polling place is the town hall. So this would not allow me to create in those parking lots a no electioneering zone or a corridor that extends out to the parking lot if it crosses that property of the church. Is that
Yeah.
the way you read this?
That's the way I read it, and I believe the intent of the no electioneering zone is to allow folks to get out of their car, get to the polls without having to directly interact with candidates. It's a protected zone where there is not electioneering going on. And if the majority of parking, as is the case for Derry, is across the street, yes, in my interpretation, the non-electioneering zone is the sidewalk that leads to the public street, across the public street crosswalk, and into the parking lot. Now, in our case, it's in common ownership, and we have an agreement with Pinkerton to use all of those spaces. In other towns where it's a church or a library or some other private or public entity, it may be different. I guess my concern is that the language here it's not flexible enough to cover all the different polling place setups that occur in New Hampshire.
Additional questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Sarah?
Good morning. My name is Sarah Burke Cohen. I represent the New Hampshire Municipal Association. The New Hampshire Municipal Association opposes this bill. I'm not going to go into great detail. I feel like the moderators here have explained essentially what the opposition is. This bill seems to be a little bit impracticable as it is written. In addition, there seems to be some contradictory statements. If you're dropping off signs 24 hours ahead of time, but the moderator is not in charge of the polling place until the polls open, it becomes problematic. A lot of schools are polling places. It could interrupt the operations by having signs, unattended signs dropped off to 20 up to 24 hours ahead of time, including, not that I would think that children are vandalizing signs, but signs could get moved, vandalized accidentally, on purpose. Schools might have to move them. And then on the polling day, when the polls open, there's discussions between candidates, maybe feisty discussions about who damaged whose sign. I think that could be problematic. Again, I'm not going to go into detail. I feel like the moderators have all covered that. NHMA opposes this and feels that you should ITL this bill. I'll take questions.
Questions from senators? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Dennis? You have the hard job, Dennis. You're not supposed to repeat anything anybody else said, so.
I sent you an email, and this is the hard copy from that.
And so if you send us the email, you're not supposed to you're not supposed to read the email, you're supposed to summarize it.
That is correct. Good day, Election Law and Municipal Affairs Committee. Thank you for taking my testimony. My name is Dennis V. Murphy II. I am the town moderator for Winchester, now serving my 6th term. I'm also the state representative for Winchester, Cheshire 11. In the past 4 years, new legislation like this has made being an election official impossible. The requirements that have been set up, the ambiguity, the hoops that we have to go through. This is one reason municipalities have more voting procedure issues, not less. For election officials, Senate Bill like 216 hinders elected officials. It does not help. This needs to stop. I beg of you to ITL Senate Bill 216 for the sake of the state of New Hampshire and the citizens that we serve. Thank you. I'll take any questions you have.
Seeing none, thank you very much. That's the last person that I have on the list. And the online, you find it here. Well, I do not anticipate exacting this bill today, but there were 4 people support and 87 in opposition. And with that, unless there's anybody that didn't sign up that really's got to speak, we will close the public hearing and we'll open the next one in just a minute. Sorry. Yep.
We'll get an open public hearing on Senate Bill 218 relative to absentee ballot outer envelopes. I recognize Senator Gray, the prime sponsor of the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am here to introduce Senate Bill 218 relative to absentee ballot outer envelopes. I represent Senate District 6, which starts up in Alton and Gilmanton, comes down Route 11 to Rochester and Stratford. Why talk about the outer envelopes? There's a court decision right now that says that moderators, although it's in statute, cannot check the signatures on the outer envelopes unless we provide training to all the people who are going to be checking those signatures, and we provide a method to cure. And what that would mean is that if somebody didn't sign the affidavit, that they'd be notified and allowed to do that signature, much like what we did when we did pre-processing back during COVID stuff. The state of Maine, one of our neighbors, doesn't use they only use one envelope. And they have the affidavit and the mailing information all on the same one. Here in the state of New Hampshire, the only reason that we have to have that outer envelope is because we've got so much stuff on the affidavit envelope that there's not enough room to put all the other information that you would need in that. The moderators, the clerks, the supervisors of the checklist have either supported or not supported this bill as it's come through before because they want pre-processing. So after being told no, no, no on my bills and trying to get them through, I relented and I put in some pre-processing in here. Certainly the people talking about opening those outer envelopes should be a public thing. I don't understand why that needs to be a public thing, because the envelope, the affidavit envelope, is not going to be opened. Therefore, we're not doing anything. In fact, the affidavit envelope will not be opened until Election Day. If it can actually, there is one provision in law that's very unique. If there's registration materials that were included in there, there is a provision in law to do something with that envelope ahead of time, but you can go back and review that. But this is, in my opinion, always has been a common sense thing. We can modify this, we can, but if a person returns that affidavit ballot, whether it's the actual person or a person that's authorized to assist the person in returning that, there is no need for that outer envelope. And I would let the clerks open them as soon as they got them, but that's one of the things that has been in the other bills that has been objected to. So I'd be happy to answer any questions on the bill. And
Questions from the senators? Senator Perkins Quokka.
Thank you, Senator Lang. Thank you, and I agree with the concept of the bill. My one question was on page 3, lines 34 and 35, which you just started to address in your opening statement. No affidavit envelopes may be opened during pre-processing. Could you expound on more of your rationale for not opening the affidavit envelopes during pre-processing?
Well, the affidavit envelopes now gives you access to the ballot, and your ballot is supposed to be secret. If I open that affidavit envelope during that pre-processing, then it is not secret, because the public will be there and doing things. So that affidavit envelope, except in the rare case that I talked about with registration materials that could be included in there, is kept quiet. And certainly even on election day, you would not even have one of your observers or poll checkers even able to see the voting on that ballot when they're being processed. So, that's one of the reasons why the 6-foot rule is there, about those observers, that the only ones that would be able to associate any particular ballot with any particular person would be an election official or one of the assigned people during that time that has been appointed. So it is very important that envelope not be opened.
Thank you.
Follow-up questions? So I just want to state what you're trying to do in the bill. So up to 4 days prior to, we're going to allow the clerk to open the outer envelope. So those who don't know, there's an outer envelope and inner envelope. You're allowed to open the outer envelope, and there's validate the data, for lack of a better phrase, highlight the user's name on the checklist. So when you go to process that ballot on election day, it's easy to find, because the highlighted ballots are all the absentee ballots when you're processing it. But you also allow for, if there's an error when you open the outer ballot and you find an error, you would allow the clerk to be able to cure that error by someone forgot a signature or something like that that's necessary. Be able to contact that voter and say, if you want your vote to count, you need to come in and sign your ballot or sign your paper. Is that the gist of the bill?
That is the gist of the bill. The motive behind it, I'm not going to sugarcoat this at all. It's so that we can check those signatures. Okay. And right now, because of that court order, I need to be able to go back to the court and say, we now have a way to cure, and we have a training program authorized by the Secretary of State. I think that one place that I know of, it's actually an FBI trainer that comes in and takes care of it or whatever. But, well,
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you, Senator. Next up is Pete Bachelet.
Good morning again. For the record, my name is Pete Bachelet. I'm the Milford's Town Moderator, and I support SB 218 for the reasons that Senator Gray just articulated and Senator Lang just followed up on. During COVID-19, when Governor Sununu authorized the pre-processing of absentee ballots, we met in the Milford Select Board's meeting room, which is smaller than this, and we had tables set up. And we not only had people that were doing the pre-processing as was described, but we also had representatives of the parties and other interested people there to listen and observe. And frankly, we've never had that many people ever in my tenure present when we were processing the absentee ballots. So by doing the pre-processing or enabling that to happen at the local community's choice, it means that we can have better and more thorough participation by interested parties, both capital P political and small p individuals. But I think one of the major advantages is that we can enable the clerks to reach out to a voter and cure the deficit on that affidavit. All of what we're doing here is trying to enable people who have the right to be able to cast their ballot. And someone that may have made a mistake, and we find that out in advance of Election Day, ought to have the ability to rectify that error. And so not only does this bill add an additional layer of convenience for those who wish to contest an absentee voter, but it enables people to have their ballots counted, which I think is the greatest benefit. So I encourage you to support SB 218, and I'd be happy to take any questions that you may have.
Questions from the senators? Seeing none, thank you, sir.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Next up is Olivia.
Good morning. For the record, Olivia Zink, Franklin voter and Executive Director of Open Democracy, a nonpartisan nonprofit, in support of Senate Bill 218. I want to thank Senator Gray, especially on page 1, line 26, where it adds that address line. I know that there's a voters in my town. I'm just going to give Scott Stanley, who lives on Pleasant Street, and his dad lives on Chance Pond Road, and then Scott Stanley III, who lives in a different address. By having, if they forget to put their junior or senior or the third on their absentee ballot that address line helps identify which voter it is if they live at different addresses. It doesn't help if they live at the same address, but I think that will address an issue that has come up before. Also allowing the moderators or their designees to open those outer envelopes. If you've ever tried to observe this during the election day, sometimes the moderators are over there in a corner and it's hard to hear the names that are being called when you're observing. But if you're doing it in advance in a smaller room, it's much easier to hear. It also saves time for election workers to be able to pre-process in advance. Some polling places have had to delay tallying. We have a law that says they have to tally when it's a certain amount of time after the polls close, but if they're still processing absentee ballots, that can create problems. I had the privilege to serve on the special committee for voter confidence, and that report does say in a bipartisan way of giving consideration for pre-processing of absentee ballots. That was testimony we heard over and over in the special committee for voter confidence, and that was an agreement that committee made in their final recommendation. The other thing that I'll just add is that the instructions on how to do an absentee ballot aren't that clear, and that's why sometimes voters will make a mistake. So we could either clarify the instructions or give this opportunity for ballots to be cured. Please pass Senate Bill 218 and allow voters to safely and securely cast absentee ballots. And if if they make a mistake, have that ability to be cured so their ballot can count. Thank you, and I'll happy to take questions.
Thank you, Olivia. Any questions from the senators? Seeing none, thank you. And our last speaker is Tina Guilford, Dairy Town Clerk.
My name is Tina Guilford. I'm a Dairy Town Clerk. In 2020, I was the Dairy Town Boss. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize it wasn't on. Again, my name is Tina Guilford. I'm the Dairy Town Clerk. In 2020, I was the Dairy Town Moderator. And we had pre-processing. House Bill 1266 was passed. And if somebody wants to Google it and look it up, you can actually see we had media there. I've never had so many people watching the processing of absentee ballots. We probably had about 40 or so people in the room listening as each name was called out. And we actively contacted voters who had not signed the envelope. And we actually had voters come in, you know, being like, I just got a phone call, I need to fix my ballot, and they were able to cure the default. So pre-processing is great. I also love that you put the voter's name and address on the affidavit envelope to get rid of the affidavit envelope, the outer envelope, if they do it right at town hall. We have a lot of voters that come in and just do everything right there at town hall. They fill out the application, they get their ballot, they complete their ballot, and then they start putting it back in the envelopes. And half the time they're trying to hand it to me in the outer envelope, and they don't even have their name and address. I tell them to put their name and address on it. So it would be great if I didn't even have to deal with that outer envelope. But part of the reason why clerks don't love opening that outer envelope, not publicly, is because a lot of voters don't put the ballot in the affidavit envelope and seal it. They literally just take the ballot, take the affidavit envelope, the instructions that they were given that they didn't even read, and they stuff it all into that outer envelope. And then when you're opening it on election day, it's all falling out everywhere. I would never want to do that without that being a public process. So that's why we have said in the past that opening these envelopes definitely needs to be done in public. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody else who wishes to testify on Senate Bill 218? Hit that. So, I think we have someone who wants to speak first, right?
Yeah. Is this on?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Again, my name is Andrew Harmon. I'm a resident of New Hampton. I wasn't originally going to speak to this bill, but after hearing Senator Gray earlier, I realized there is something I'd actually like to share that I think is relevant to this. There was a process created during the pandemic for people who have print disabilities to be able to independently and accessibly do an absentee ballot, but the process is at the time was not great, and I don't know if the physical process has been changed. Part of that process is having to fill a form on a PDF where using a screen reader, it all kind of blurs together so that I don't know if I'm editing the right field or not. And I almost had my ballot rejected because of this issue. It would have gone to the outside envelope. And so I also got a lot of calls during the 2020 election from what I thought were random people trying to tell me my ballot wasn't accepted. Not being able to have an official from the town clerk's office call me to let me know if there are issues, I think is a fantastic idea. And I am thoroughly in support of this. So please vote ought to pass on this bill. And I'm willing to take any questions.
Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much, sir. Sure, if you want to step up real quick just restate your name.
He's good.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Dave Nelson, Dairy Town Moderator. I endorse all of the previous testimony and would like to highlight additional direct benefits of this bill in shortening the time to get results at the end of the night. Makes it easier on our poll workers who don't have to stay quite as long, and during large elections, that could be the wee hours of the morning. It also allows final results to be available to the voters and the candidates earlier, so I would encourage you to ought to pass on this bill. Thank you. I will take questions.
Questions? Seeing none, you're all set. Thank you. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak on Senate Bill 218? Seeing none, online we had 213 people in support, 3 opposed. And with that, I'll close the hearing on Senate Bill 218 and turn the gavel back over to Chair.
Okay. Do I have a motion to go into executive session?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to go into executive session.
Mr. Chair, I'd move out to pass on Senate Bill 218.
I just want to make sure Jessica's set. So we have a motion of ought to pass on 218. Second. We have a second.
So, Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yeah.
So again, I think this bill does a lot of good work for our election process. It allows the pre-processing, it requires notice to the citizens when it's going to happen, and has a limited scope of time when they can be processed, 4 days prior to the election. It allows the ability to cure deficiencies on ballots that may be what is already a complicated process, allows for the curing of the deficiencies. And lastly, and although I will say it's probably very minor, the time savings is there, depending on how many absentee ballots you have to process. There is some time saving there for that will allow for results to come out on a faster basis. I know when I process absentee ballots during there, to open the envelope, take it to the clerk, get checked in, take the ballot over. Some of that work, if I could shorten that, makes it easier because voters are coming in at 4 o'clock to start voting again when the afternoon is quiet. And we process the absentee ballots. So the sooner we can get those ballots processed and shrink the time it takes to do that, the better it is. So.
Just a comment that there is a difference between what this bill says and what was happening during the COVID stuff. During the COVID bill, and it was actually a bill that came through the legislature, it wasn't the governor's executive order. But at that time, the challenges of absentees were going to take place or took place when that pre-processing was happening. All right, that is not in here, as intended not to be in here, because the challenges of those ballots, in my opinion, should happen on election day at the polling place when that ballot is being processed. So just so that you know that. Also, a lot of the highlighting that was done during that pre-processing, if we could just get the Secretary of State and the municipalities to have printers that would print in color, you could do all that highlighting and everything else all automatic, and just, as it comes out of the printer, if it was returned to the clerk, it could be highlighted in yellow, and if it was whatever, it could be anyway. So that there's still things that can be done to make the process better. But any further comments? Okay, seeing none, we have a motion not to pass. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. The ayes have it.
Move consent.
We have a motion for consent and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, the ayes have it. And Senator Gray will take that one out. At least he wants to take it out. All right, we have 2 bills that we need to deal with. I think I'm right on that. Am I not?
Yes.
And I must have 2 copies of the map sheet, because I did mark one off.
103 is one of them.
Yep. Okay. So do we have copies of the amendment that was proposed on 103 now? Make sure they get out. On 103, I asked the prime sponsor to set out a list of criteria that the Secretary of State could use when deciding whether a polling place of more than, and as the bill is written, 20,000 people needed to do something different to make sure that the election happened properly. And that's what this amendment is here's the criteria that should be addressed when a town moderator, et cetera, so has the audience got copies? No.
So in other words, Chair, if I may,
Olivia, you can have my copy for right now. Anyone else need a copy? Okay. Senator.
so in other words, if the Secretary of State has reviewed a plan addressing these various factors and feels that the 20,000 registered voters can be accommodated reasonably in that polling place, then it may proceed as a polling place with the sort of approval of the Secretary of State.
I guess I'd have to go back and look for the word in here that,
Jointly
Mr.
approved.
Chair, the way I read it, it says anybody over 20,000, if you're still going to only have one polling place, have to submit a plan.
Right.
Otherwise, it's assumed you have to have two. That's the way I read it.
Yeah.
now, in discussion with the Secretary of State, if that number from 20,000 was dropped down to 15,000, that would affect only 7 communities in New Hampshire. A related but not important with this bill right now is that it is more difficult every time we do a redistricting because of the large numbers in some of the communities in the southern part of the state to be able to make Senate districts. With House districts, I can have flotarials, I can have multiple reps for whatever, but I can't, that's not legal to do in the Senate districts, okay? And so when you take these large communities that are right next to each other, there is no way that you can get to, in this last year's number, I think was 57,000, almost 58,000 voters. And to stay within that 10% bracket, up to 5% above and, 5% below, or 6% above and 4% below, but you only get that 10%, that these communities in the future may have to break up into voting districts, or whatever the term in the statute is right now, to be able to recognize them like a city ward, where they can be recognized in the census and they can be districting, and you can have, in this case, a senator that, represents half of the town of Derry and half of the town of, okay? But it has to be initiated by those communities. But we are fast approaching that we will not be able to meet the criteria. Not that we won't be able to do it, because we will do it, and somebody will take us to court, and the courts will say, well, yeah, there's no way to make sure that you can break this one and this one and this one up. So yeah, your limit is not 10%, but that dilutes what's going on in trying to have one man, one vote. So,
Mr. Chair, redistricting aside, that'll start a whole spinning conversation that might go no idea where. I do support this concept. Again, the idea is to make it so voters can get their vote and get out. and do it in a reasonable time frame that a town allows. I know that I heard, again, in some of the polling places where they didn't have enough parking in this last presidential election, where people were waiting literally an hour in their car trying just to get to a parking space to be able to do this. So, I'd support lowering the number to 15,000, and I'd support the amendment as written that says that it may be a case where you have, 100 polling stations and 25,000 parking spots, and you have no problem. And you can just submit your plan to the Secretary of State, who can approve it and say, I'm still only going to have one polling place, even though we have 25,000 voters in our town, because we can manage that. Here's how we're managing it. So it allows an out clause for those towns that have a plan and can do it. But at the end, I think that if they don't have a plan and they can't do it, they need to have a second polling place for the ease of the voter to shorten the time. I know when the Attorney General's office comes to the polling place, one of the questions we have is how long is it taking a voter from the time they park their car to the time they can cast a ballot, right? And we look for a 20-minute window for that. That's what, in my town, that's what we hope for, is less than 20 minutes, right? And I think that this goes towards that, allows for the ease of the voter to be able to show up, cast their ballot, and get out without having to wait an hour in line for traffic potentially.
Do we have a motion?
I'll
Ought
move
to pass?
OTP.
We have a motion by Senator Lang, ought to pass.
Second that.
Your Rochford, second.
Mr. Chair, I'll offer amendment 0625S.
0625S. And
And I make a further amendment to that amendment and reduce
I
line,
will second it.
yeah,
So,
and on line 5 and line 7, change it 20,000 to 15,000.
okay.
So while I appreciate the sentiment of keeping it easy to vote, and I'm sort of, I do think this amendment is an improvement to the original bill. I guess I want to be cautious that we're not overreacting to a local traffic situation in the last election. These are big undertakings to open an entire polling station, find the volunteers, have it open for 15 hours. Make sure there's a sufficient location, and then if you don't want to do that, you now have to submit a whole plan to the Secretary of State and the Attorney General. There's no timelines in here for approval, and so this does just seem to make this a state issue when really our towns and cities have been handling it at the cost they can bear. And if we add polling stations, we are going to add costs. So I think there's some balancing that needs to be done here. And I guess I haven't heard enough. There was one traffic situation that was raised in the hearing, and I guess I just haven't heard enough about this being an issue, especially with poll books, being new and just sort of unrolling. It just seems like we're sort of not giving the system a chance to kind of adjust, and instead we're imposing this new requirement on them that just sort of strips them of their local ability to make this decision. So I don't know if we, have we looked at the cost of sort of additional polling stations?
The cost, as we look at the FN report, talks about 10,000 to 100,000. I think that's an interesting number. If I take and have 2 polling places, certainly I still need an acting moderator. I need an acting supervisor of the checklist. I need an acting clerk, and I need 3 acting selectmen, in addition to whatever workers would be authorized for inspectors of election, which in this case is, I guess it would be at least 8,000 voters, give or take, that would be shifted to another polling place. And that would be 2,500 plus 2 for every whatever after that. So I don't get to that number, that they're getting to. There may be costs for renting a space, but still, 10, I think I could get to the 10,000, but I don't know that I could get to the 100,000 for one additional polling place. But just to answer your question as best I can.
Mr. Chairman, the only thing I'd add is, again, this is only during presidential election cycles. This isn't during your off-year general election when turnout tends to be significantly lower. It isn't during your municipal elections where they have to have 2 polling places. This is in the presidential elections where historically our turnout's been relatively, significantly high. And I'd hazard a guess that the next one's going to be probably even more so because they have an open seat that's going to happen. And a lot of people are going to be vying for it, and a lot of people are going to be doing it. So I think that, again, during the presidential election cycle, when the turnout is extremely high, this is problematic. I know minimum of 2 locations that had problems this year. And that's without me even going out looking for them. That was just people who came to me and said, we have a problem. People waiting an hour in their car just to get to park, to get to wait, and then wait an hour in line to vote. And so if this solves that problem, especially during those high turnout presidential elections, and it doesn't require a town, they just have to, what it requires them to do a plan if they don't want to do it, which I think is reasonable. Otherwise, they recognize they got a problem and they break it up.
Yeah, I'm not saying anything proposed isn't reasonable. You know, I hear their concerns being raised, I guess. But just to raise another one, if we're going to have additional polling places for presidential elections, then that just also creates some confusion, right? It's something you have to stand up newly every 4 years. So I think there's some balancing stuff here, but I've made my point. So.
Senator Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think just for presidential elections, I've heard from other towns, not Manchester, of the difficulty they had, and it's unacceptable in my mind that they would have to, like you say, Senator Lang, drive around for an hour until they find a parking spot. You know, that's not conducive to easy voting. So just for presidential elections, I mean, I do understand there may be some confusion in other. However, I don't think that's a large barrier to climb. That's easily, understood. So yeah, just for presidential elections, I like the 15,000.
And it should be noted that Manchester, has their 12 wards, their population is like 110,000. So, their population would not rise to the limits that are here. All right. Seeing no other discussion, what we're voting on first is the amended amendment. Okay? And the only change is the 20,000 to the 15,000, which, like I say, would include, according to what I was told, 7 communities in New Hampshire. Okay. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay.
Nay.
And that's 4-1. Okay. And we'll go back to the bill as amended. They ought to pass the motion as amended. Further discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay.
Nay.
Okay. And
Consent?
is there
Consent is
objection to
fine.
consent?
No
I'll
objection.
move consent.
Consent is fine. All roll. All right. All those in favor of consent say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Guys have it. And Senator Roachford, I don't think you've gotten one today to take out.
I got one, but I'll do another.
Oh, okay.
Got unincorporated places.
Oh, that's correct. That's correct. So we'll give you extra.
And I should note, I don't have any communities in my district with 15,000.
Is that right? All right. So 213. Okay, 213 was my bill on the absentee voting. There is an amendment that Senator Perkins Quokka did put forward. It would be my opinion that if we're going to do something with your amendment that a different bill should be selected to do that. But that's just my opinion. So we'll open the discussion on 213 and then decide what we're going to do. The silence is deafening. As they say.
So I'll speak to my potential amendment, Chair. So I've proposed amendment 0620. And essentially what this would do is allow for an additional way that citizenship can be verified that is completely voluntary. Essentially, when you are acquiring your real ID, you can opt into a program that would allow essentially access to your citizenship status, but not any of your underlying documentation or information. The DMV has a system where essentially they can display and make available to users, what citizenship status is without transmitting any private information. And so this would simply provide another option so that if citizenship needed to be verified, it could be done so through DMV records, which are secure and on a voluntary basis. And so the intent is to ensure that we are meeting the goal of verifying citizenship in a way that allows our voters to vote at a time that's convenient for them, which I think were two of the stated goals. So.
Okay. I will move on to pass from the underlying bill
I'll second that.
213. And since I'm not in favor of the amendment, I will look to my left to see if anybody wants to offer this.
I will move amendment 2025-0620S. And I believe I already spoke to it.
620.
Yep. Okay, discussion on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I might support this as a standalone bill, but not to replace what we're doing here with just this. So as a standalone bill, I'm going to vote against it. Or standalone amendment, I'm going to vote against it because it undoes all the work that Senator McRae's bill looks to fix. And so I encourage you by my no vote doesn't mean necessarily I won't look at this for next term if you bring up a separate bill in.
Okay. Senator Gray, your bill is intending essentially at the time someone registers for an absentee ballot to verify citizenship via.
Well, I want to stick with your amendment first.
Yep.
Because unless we deal with that, then asking about the underlying bill that you make go away wouldn't be germane at this point.
They're related.
Okay, I will give you some leeway.
Just because I do think you're correct. My amendment's more relevant for a time when electronic records are available, but your intent here is to ensure that citizenship is verified in connection with an absentee ballot. And so the reason I offer it for this bill is because I want to ensure that we don't have voters who, in the effort of verifying citizenship, are turned away from voting when they've arrived at great inconvenience or are not able to vote. We know that people who've changed their name or people who might have names that are a little more unusual in New England, for example, disproportionately bear the impact of needing to prove citizenship. So we just, that could include married women, it could include a wide variety of people. And so ensuring that all voters are able to vote is the goal. And so I'm providing an additional way that citizenship could be verified.
Yes, ma'am. Further discussion on the amendment? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Nay. The nays have it. The motion fails. Okay, we're back to the ought to pass motion. Is there further discussion?
I have said my comments.
Okay. All those in favor of ought to pass, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay.
Nay.
And the motion passes. Is there an objection to consent?
I would prefer not to consent.
That's an objection. All right. And I will take this one out. Okay. Now. I know we're getting close to time that people need to be doing other things. We dealt with 44. I'm going through the master list.
You want to go through 221? I have that amendment.
221.
That's the verification of the checklist, 6 year.
Okay. If everyone can get ready to talk about 221, then.
So, Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion to auto pass on 221.
I have a motion that ought to pass on 221. I will second it.
And Mr. Chair, I offer amendment number 665S. And I can speak to my amendment.
665F. And I will second that also.
So, Mr. Chair, if I may speak to my amendment. So again, this shortens the verification process to a 4-year process, every 4 years. It'll look at the voting rolls. It'll look back 6 years. So we cover 2 presidential election cycles as well as multiple local and municipal, local and state elections as well. And if a person hasn't voted in those in the last 2 presidential elections or in any of the local or state elections for that period of time, would have the person's name removed from the voter checklist.
Discussion.
Are we discussing the amendment?
Yes.
And Mr. Chair, I'll just remind people again, if your name is removed from the checklist and you show up at an election, they can reuse your prior registration with the Secretary of State's office by looking it up on the voter checklist or the Secretary of State's registration and renew you. You don't have to go through the process of registering all over again. Those roles at the Secretary of State's are still there. So my name got accidentally removed and I show up, the supervisor checklist will just go online with I forgot the name of the program that the Secretary of State uses. ElectionNet. And look up my name and say, oh, he's already proved residency, he's already proved citizenship, and just add my name back to the voter roll without me having to produce my birth certificate all over again.
Just a clarification of that. If a polling place has access to the internet and can get to ElectionNet, that is perfectly legal. Okay. One of the things that we talked about last year when House Bill 1270, I think was the number, is requiring the Secretary of State to have a tablet or something there that had information from ElectionNet there such that you could verify that a voter was registered in Manchester 3 and now has moved to Derry, okay? Because once you know that, then according to law, they do not have to prove citizenship. They do not have to prove age. They only have to prove their domicile. But to prove domicile, the document, you have to prove identity first. Put some quotes around it. So, you know, in the case of some of the smaller communities up north, that becomes more difficult. Certainly, I would encourage the Secretary of State, if they don't have that, to have people able to call into the hotline and say, oh yeah, that person is registered, because they all do have phone connections, because you have to have the phone connection to make the accessible voting machine work, right? So again, knowing all of that, 99% of what you said was exactly true.
And one last thing also requires notice that the person's being removed. So again, when the names are being struck, there'll be letters sent. And the voter will be given 30 days to say, no, I'm in town, I just haven't voted, keep my name on the checklist. And it'll allow that opportunity for the voter to stay on the checklist.
Okay, so right now we're voting on the amendment 0665S. Believe is the right number.
Yes. And while I appreciate that this does have a longer look back period, it does require cleanup even more frequently, which again is somewhat of a burden on our towns and cities. And while I appreciate everything the senator said, our voter rolls could also be cleaned up by things like joining ERIC, where we can have electronic verification of people in our voter checklist and have automatic systems that do this. So I think there are alternatives out there that can accomplish the shared goal of keeping our voter rolls accurate without causing a burden on our voters.
And it should be noted that I did help supply the words that are in here, and that this is actually a compromise between the people who don't want to change what we're doing now and the people who want to do it every month. And I'm being a little facetious. I'm being a little facetious there, but no, they were every year, every other year, and that this is that compromise. I think that is the reasonable part. And people should also know that we do check with databases supplied by the federal government about deaths. We do check with the Postal Service for permanent change of addresses and some other things that we do to try to keep the voter rolls. In fact, a story from last year at some point was that there was a representative in Durham whose mother passed away 2 days before the election. And the story was that she got to vote, and that is not the case. The system caught it. The system took care of that absentee ballot. So, we do go out and check. We have a system, and it does work. So, all right. With that, is there any further discussion on the amendment? All right. All those in favor of Amendment 0665S, say aye. Aye. All those opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. And we're back to the bill as amended for the discussion. All those in favor of the bill as amended, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Nay.
Okay. That's a 3-2.
Consent off the,
It's probably fine.
I'm sorry? I move consent.
We have a motion for consent. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? And Senator Lang?
Sure.
All right. One, we dealt with all but one of the bills today. All right.
So it leaves section 2.
I think that we only have a few bills to hear next week. And I have a dentist appointment, so I know I'm not going to be able to be here until probably 9:30. Any other restrictions that any of you have that'll? All right. So we'll start the hearings at 9:30 next time. And if there's anything else, remember that we do have that hearing this afternoon because it would be a municipal affairs thing to deal with the risk pools. If you haven't gotten the copies of the bill and the amendments that are out there, certainly reach out. I don't know if you have them all, Jessica, but if you don't, Deb has them.
Thank you.
So
How long do you anticipate that? I've got a 1 o'clock, so I can come in after.
I think that it will be a lively discussion.
I agree.
I'll be
I
late.
think we'll be there.
If you want to stay a couple of minutes, I will go into part of that. since we were in executive session, the Secretary of State has an oversight responsibility in statute right now when it comes to these risk pools, and has had some discussions in providing that oversight that thought would be best handled by a revision to the statute. And so that is what we're going to be talking about, is what they need for their backup holdings, both the minimum and maximum that they're allowed, and how that would be handled. And there's also a secondary discussion about if a risk pool failed, who would be responsible for the outstanding liabilities. And since the statute only says that a risk pool can be an association of the entities, mostly towns and stuff, and doesn't talk about assignment of any, then I don't know how it wouldn't be the cities and towns, but that's part of what we'll probably hear about in the testimony today. So, any questions of me on that? If you contact me outside of here, I may be able to provide you additional information before the meeting, but about conversations I've had with the participants.
Motion to come out of executive session.
I have a motion to come out of executive session. All those.
Second.
Oh, we have a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Our business of the day is not complete. We are in recess until 1 o'clock. For those people who want to listen online, you would need to go to the link for the Finance Committee, and it will be recorded. And with that, we are in recess.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.